Thank you for joining this video. We will be focused on interventions delivered by school counselors and how we decide which ones should work. Just a reminder that all of these materials that will be used in this video belong to ASCA and they cannot be duplicated or used without the express permission of ASCA. Let's start by focusing on what our objectives are. We've identified three objectives for this session. Excuse me, four objectives for this session. We want to be able, and for you to be able to determine what students need, to know and be able to do anytime we're delivering some extra support. We want you to be able to create a bank of activities and strategies that you can use for those students who need more. We also want you to consider how to select what's going to be the most effective or be likely to be the most effective when you're making the selection. And then finally, we want you to be able to locate information on your own following participation in this video. So why do we need to spend time on trying to figure out what students need? Well, part of that is because it's one of our ethical commands. Our ethical code states that we have a responsibility for delivering research-based interventions. That means we need to have some information around why these interventions and strategies are being used and that they have the most likelihood of being effective with students. Responding to that ethical command is important, but I think even more important, this is what's good for students. Each and every student in our caseload deserves quality services. And so that means that we have to make good decisions on what we provide to students. So let's think about school counselors delivering services. Everything we deliver should reflect either current best practice and or have some evidence that it's going to work with our students. Now that can be a challenge, and it's helpful to spend some time compiling information on what students actually need to know and do in order to be successful in school. So this session is framed to focus on both Tier 1, what we call standard practice, and Tier 2, our focused work. And knowing that they have a little bit of process that's a little bit different, we'll define what those processes are and especially focus on that Tier 2, that added step that's required for them. So let's think about the frame for what this we're going to present today. When we intervene with students, that is a little bit intrusive. It certainly changes their daily routine. And I think that adds to our responsibility to deliver things that are intentional, that are well designed, that they're selected, that they focus on building students' acquisition of the student standards. Everything we do has to reflect all of that awareness that what we're doing is not interfering with, but it's disrupting their day. It's an intrusion. We have that responsibility to make sure that we're intruding with purpose and evidence-based work. So, thinking about standard practice, this is what you deliver to all. They're the activities that are foundational for the counseling program, and we do them year after year, delivering, assessing, and improving them over time. These are most definitely required to be based on our knowledge of what students need and what they need to be able to know and to do. Think of particular students at a particular age or in a particular grade level. That's going to help us understand what students at that particular level need. It can be based on what we already know about human development, based on our professional training. It can follow the data that reveals issues that are existent within cohorts of students. And as we deliver it and assess it and and adjust it, we're going to be adding to the evidence that it's going to have that has the likelihood of working with our students. Focused work is also something that we do every school year, but it focuses on needs that have already been identified in that year's analysis of school data. It can also focus on current issues or circumstances and situations that might develop, but it's focused work on a specific subset of students. This requires a little bit more intentionality about both the content and the focus of our activities because they have to be designed for that specific group of students and the unique constellation of needs that exist for them. Our achievement gap work falls into this category. It's still something that we always do, but it includes that extra step that might not always be evident in the standard work we do of the school counseling. That added step is the collection of partner perspectives, gaining insights from those who know the students best to discover what they think is contributing to the problem. This is not simply about distinguishing tiered work, classroom and large group compared to small group or individual work. It includes both modes of delivery. This is about making those selections for about interventions and activities that we develop for a specific group of students. So here's a couple of examples. Tier 1 examples. We might realize that a particular grade level has a tendency for students' grades to go down. Ninth grade, certainly that happens. They're in a new building usually. They're experiencing new expectations and demands. Ninth grade is a place that has in, increased need for support on being an academic a successful student. One grade level may exhibit more conflict referrals to the office every year. Third graders may tend to struggle with being independent. Kindergarten students need to know how to become a student. They need instruction on self-regulation and self-soothing. They need to understand how to do school. Tier 2 examples might be exploring the data priorities that the school has set for its students and experiencing subsets of students that are contributing to that priority or a member of that priority. Or perhaps even a class experiences something significant like a traumatic event that's kind of disrupts the student's sense of safety or calm. Those would be tier 2 experiences where we would focus work specifically around that unique students. So what do we do for these circumstances? Well, first of all, we want to make sure that we stay counselors. We have a specific set of skills that we've been trained on that are unique to our position in the building. And we need to deliver those skills, and these are identified here. You'll also find in the book, the step-by-step book for the 5th edition, includes a chart on counseling models and techniques that might be a quality reference for you. These skills that are on this slide and in that book shape everything that we do. Reflect on your own training, reflect on your theoretical orientations, and then claim and proclaim your counselor identity and make sure that these are evident in all of the strategies that we deliver. We also have to deliver quality instruction. It's a tier 1 strategy. It's delivered to everybody. Some of us were trained as teachers, some of us are not, but all of us are capable of delivering all of these evidence-based strategies for instruction. Now, we're not going to talk about those here. We're going to focus on the targeted work and the work for everybody. But evidence-based instruction is another place where we have to make decisions that we're delivering the best possible stuff to students. Small groups are another thing where we have to think about what are we doing. In fact, school counselors offer more small groups than really any other setting. So remember your training and make sure we're delivering these small group experiences well. This is not just about collecting a bunch of students and having a talk with them. Yes, we sometimes do that. But a tier 2 intervention that is a small group is delivered by a professional with a specific intent, grounded in the Ask a Student standards, and delivered with strategies that have evidence for possibly working with this group of students. Make sure that your groups are designed and planned and delivered with fidelity. Know what's best practice and then strive to deliver it. We need to remember as we're making all of these decisions that about what students need, that there's a process. This slide shows part of what's called the RIOT ISO matrix, RIOT/ICEL. It's a process for schools to follow when they're making decisions about students who are not performing at ability. This section identifies what are considered to be the process for deciding where to intervene. I think a lot of times we start with what's wrong with the student. How do we fix the student? This model reminds us that we need to consider the instructional practices, the curriculum, and the environment in the classroom and in the school before we ever get to thinking about what do students need. Consider the systems, policies, procedures, and how they're influencing student performance first. Then we look at the students and we try to find what do they need, what do they need to know, what do they need to be able to do.
This graphic depicts the cycle of continuous improvement that we've seen over and over. It's an ongoing process that moves from identifying a need to really understanding that need and then doing something about it and then measuring to see the effectiveness of that need. We have to slow ourselves down to really do this process intentionally to make sure that the interventions we're using are actually effective. Today's presentation is going to focus mostly on the red circles. So the researching of possible factors and selecting the strategies. So we're going to go into a little bit of a step-by-step. The first thing is to consider starting now. It's easy to push this off for another day, but today is the day to take a look at this. Look at the achievement data of your school and really dig deep into who are these students that are struggling. Are there any things that these student groups have in common or not? And really be sure that you understand who these subsets of students are that are underperforming. They're not just numbers, they're actual students. And then you want to do some research. There are lots of people who know the students at your school. Reach out to them, understand the students a little bit better, and be sure that in your research, you're checking with the students themselves to figure out what do they think might be some barriers or struggles that they have. Understand the skills that may be lacking, the knowledge that students need to learn, and then after you've pulled all that information together, select one student standard, one behavior standard. Remember that our Ask a Student standards are grounded in research. So if you want to be doing research-based work, this is the place to begin. When you work through the lens of these standards, you are doing research-based work. Standards identify what we should be providing to students. And that means that you really need to understand this document. So please take some time to review this carefully so that you really understand what it all means. So consider one of the behavior standards and really see what the text says about that standard. In the new step-by-step guide, you'll see a chapter on student standards, and then those are demonstrated in the appendix. So make a list of knowledge and skills that might be relevant, and then you can start doing a broader search on the internet. Research what students might need to know or do and start adding to the list. So you want to have an expansive list, and then your next step is to edit your list. Establish priorities and really narrow your list down for what is the most relevant and real for your particular students. As you focus on your narrowed list, This slide will identify ways that you can continue to grow in your understanding of what students need to know or do to be successful in school. So this is where you're going to do some research. You're going to look into some professional training, literature, online resources, and you're going to do some consultation. You have educational partners and experts at your school or district. And please understand that there are people that might know more about the subgroup of students. And so spend some due diligence to really get a firm understanding of what these students may need to gain in knowledge and skills. And then please talk to the students. Their perspective is so important. And sometimes we can get going on our Google searches and forget that the people right in front of us are the experts. So ask them, what do you need to do differently? What would you like to know about? How can I help you be more successful? Ask the students, and their perspective on this is going to be essential for you really doing the most effective strategies for them. It also helps them to really be bought into what you're trying to work on with them. If they feel like it's just another adult telling them what to do and their perspective isn't being considered, that's going to change their buy-in. You want them to be bought in and to know that their voice is being reflected in what you're trying to do. So remember that the ASCA behavior standards drive the work of school counselors. They ground all of our activities, all of our strategies in research, and they serve as that lens through which activities and strategies get filtered. This is the metric that we use to assess effectiveness of our strategies, and they provide evidence to really focus on advocacy for taking time away from traditional classroom time, that kind of thing, and dedicating time and resources to your work. So remember that you always start with contributing factors as you work to select the most effective behavior standard to make change, positive change for the student. So here's an example. Knowing, you need to know what is grounded in research or evidence. And so one example that we're sharing here is a very common strategy that counselors like to use, and it's BLS 7, or I'm sorry, BLS 3. So what are some strategies that work to help students improve time management, organization, and study skills? We see this want to be used a lot. Well, here's a list of several things, and you can take a look at those and maybe do a little research after you see this list and think, do I know what PQ4R is? Well, this is your chance to dig a little bit deeper here. So research on study skills really shows these evidence-based techniques for studying. And you can look into each one to find out more and really find the ones that kind of fit you and your style and your work. And then do some more research on them so that they're tools in your tool belt that you can use to support students. Remember that to always be discerning when you're doing an internet search. Be sure that you are able to look for credible sites and sources. Just because it's on the internet doesn't mean that it's well researched. So be sure that you've gone that extra mile yourself so that you know that you're getting the best examples out there.
So let's talk a little bit about how we find out what we need to know about underperforming students. If you look at the 30 behavior standards, they're kind of big picture items. The one we were just looking at, BLS 3, includes time management, organizational skills, and study skills. That's 3 big buckets. That slide gave you just the information for study skills, and it would be okay for somebody to choose LS3 and then focus just on study skills, just making sure that the skills offered are those that are actually found in um, research. So when you start doing these online questions, what we have found to be one of the most effective tools is to just post a question. You know, AI can be your friend. You're going to get a lot of responses when you post this question, which is when you have to do exactly what was just said. You have to be discerning. Going through all that was offered in response to this question, these are some of the things that were identified as what underperforming students need. They need hope. Beside it, you're going to see that there are learning strategies and self-management skills that attach to hope. 4, which is self-motivation and self-direction, and 7 in learning strategies, the goal work, and then the responsibility for self under self-management are all connected to hope. Let's look at the rest that show up. Goal work, planning, predicting, scheduling skills, study task and how to do that well, how to manage distractions, building their own sense of self-efficacy, thinking about their futures and what they want to do with life and where they want to reach, making positive connections with peers, and making positive connections with adults. When you're thinking about the adults, you need somebody for the students to have that's going to be an encourager and at the same time give them healthy feedback. So this gives you a whole lot of things to consider when you're thinking about the underperforming students. Well, this is all over the place. It's a lot of good information. You're not expected to deliver all of this. Basically, for our work, when we're delivering lessons in small groups, we're going to focus on one standard at a time. So let's look a little bit at what is offered for hope. Well, one of the things that we need to know about hope is that there's two big pieces of hope. It's about having a faith in the future that is positive, and it's about feeling like you can make that future come true. So it's that sense of personal efficacy that you can create the change and that the change is possible in a positive way in your future. These are two things that can be taught to students. It's why career work often works well for kids who are underperforming. Goal work, again, builds that sense of hope for kids. This slide offers a lot of ways that you can build hope in students. Let's just briefly going through those. You can model positive talk by talking aloud about your own processes and helping them reframe their own negative thoughts and interpretations. You can talk about growth mindsets. All of that is modeling positive talk. We can ask questions that get the students to focus on positive things that happen today. There's some examples of questions there. You can do some work around their emotional competence and empathy, helping them name, recognize, appreciate all feelings. All of that's going to help build empathy, and that can in turn help them foster their own sense of hope as they learn to be empathic about their own processes, actions, and things that happen. We can give them ways to manage their stress. There's so many ways to do that, but helping them manage their stress, teaching about the learning process and that mistakes are a valuable part of that process, and understanding that the process is important, that it's not just about the final product, but the process matters. We can reinforce their positive memories as we ask them to think about, well, think about a time when you were feeling better or more successful. Reflect on those happier times. You can teach them about perspective taking. And that can include recognizing your own thoughts and interpretations and how those thoughts and interpretations are either helping or not helping their own mood, their sense of self, their thinking processes, their willingness to engage in work. You can provide ways for them to discover new and or different perspectives. And finally, journaling. Journaling is such an important skill for kids to acquire, for anybody to acquire. So teach them different methods and strategies, and then support that process as they learn to journal. Journaling works best if it can be sustained for 2 weeks, but that's hard to do. But we can teach them all of those processes so that they can get into the habit of some journaling activities. The next slide talks about attribution theory. Um, and this is something that can be taught to students as young as third grade. I think that's amazing. Think back to your graduate days and remember what attribution is. It's about how people attribute reasons for their successes and their failures. What's important for us to remember is that we're not very good at it. So it kind of sounds like this. We tend to overemphasize internal reasons for our failures and offer external reasons for our successes. It kind of minimizes our role in success and magnifies our role in failure. So here's what it sounds like. I failed the test because I, internal reason, am not smart. That's an internal attribution for a failure. Or I passed the test because it, the external reason, was easy. We can teach kids to do a better job of attributing their failures and their successes more accurately. So when we ask the question about um, what do we do for students who aren't completing their work, there's a lot on this slide. Um, you can look at all of these, but all of these offer ways and places for you to intervene. Teaching kids how to break down tasks. Again, going back to time management skills, study skills, increasing their sense of self-efficacy. Um, Self-management skill strategy number 3 is independent work. See, that can be tied to a lot of these, that all of these would contribute to helping kids do better with their independent work. So look up the learning objectives in the step-by-step text when you purchase that, and then see if any of these skills and tips that are identified on this slide show up in the objectives for a particular standard. That's going to help you make that selection around what standard should I use when I'm working with these students. Let's think about tips for the unmotivated student. I get a little frustrated sometimes with these because these can be the students who get identified as being lazy or not valuing um, uh, school. And I think there's more to it than that. So when we've got students who appear unmotivated, let's be careful about how we define that. But what we can do for those students is making sure that we focus on what's connected to motivation. Motivation requires activation. You have to start with some motivation and you start being motivated before you know you need to be motivated. And then being able to persist with the motivation and then adjusting the intensity of the motivation as you work through whatever processes. So things that we can do as school counselors is think about making sure that all of our classrooms are threat-free. Some students don't feel comfortable risking asking a question or making mistakes. When we can help students have choices and responsibilities and track their own progress. All of the items on this particular slide are relevant to motivation of students, and they can guide your indirect services for students who need more. Those indirect services include when we're working with other people like teachers on how to motivate students. So this slide gives you things that would work for your indirect services. And again, you're going to be delivering to them and helping them understand this is what it takes to be a motivated student. This is evidence. This is found in the research and can help them support the students who need more to be successful. And then there's a slide on tips to increase student engagement. And again, I think this is a great one. It can be connected to learning strategy number 8, which is about engagement in uh, challenging coursework. I'm not sure why that came out of order, but all of these 6 things are grounded in research and can build that sense of engagement with students. We want to make sure that they take time to think before we ask them to answer something. We want to have instruction delivered by teachers that follows that 2 to 10 ratio of instruction followed by 2 minutes to process, reflect, or respond. Stepping away from perfectionism is a big deal. And in our school setting, we tend to do a lot of things that celebrate perfection. So all of these things are going to be connected to engagement, and it's going to help with our students feeling um, motivated to be engaged, um, able to be engaged, willing to be engaged.
So let's dig a little bit deeper now as to some of the contributing factors as to why students might be underperforming. Just a reminder, in the 5th edition of the Ask a National model, we identify attendance and discipline as contributing factors, and they are possible influences on why a student's academic performance may not be up to expectation. So we need to be prepared to develop strategies to really identify and meet the needs of particular students. So starting with the question, we're just going to narrow it a little bit more. What do underperforming students with attendance issues need? And then you'll see these 9 tips that come up in the research. And research on attendance is really important because we have some long-held practices in schools that actually don't always bear up in the research. So be sure that you're really questioning some of the practices that you might have in your building. So instead of some of those things, you might really want to focus on BSMS 7, which is effective coping skills. And so when you focus on that, you're going to help students reflect and acknowledge how they actually feel about school. And you're going to be able to have an opportunity to get to the root of those feelings, teaching students coping strategies and techniques to self-soothe if they're feeling stressed out in the school setting. You're going to do some really specific strategies and coping skills about managing situations that tend to generate stress. Addressing these feelings and developing these coping skills will enhance students' attendance. And therefore, when attendance improves, we believe that academic performance will also improve. So let's dig a little bit deeper into some of these strategies for addressing stress. So there's two kinds of stress that shows up. It's the problem or strategies for stress, the problem focused and the emotion focused. And so when we need to be sure to understand those two types. So the problem focus addresses the source of the stress, which sometimes we may or may not have control over. And the emotion focus addresses the emotions that come with the stress. So we can teach students different strategies for different types of stress that show up. And this helps students to really effectively be able to deal with their stresses in a healthy way. And don't underestimate young children's ability to really learn these strategies. And this also is a way to help students receive the social support that they might need to just moderate the negative effects of stress. So when you're choosing a coping strategy, we need to teach them how to decide what's going to work. And a type of strategy selected is based on a student's individual level of control over the stressor. So these visuals can be really helpful working with students, and understanding that there are things for all of us that you cannot control and things that you can control. So the visual Venn diagrams can be really meaningful to help students understand. And also think it's important to understand that some things no one can control and some things they can't control because they're children and the adults in their life have more control over certain things. But there are always things that they can control. And so to help students really identify what part is within their control and how to sort of let go of the things that they can't control anyway. So, looking at another evidence based process is to kind of do this 4-step process in managing stress. Starting off with identifying, helping students to be able to articulate what is it that generates stress for them. And that's going to be unique to each student. Ask students to describe for you, what do they do usually when they encounter these situations or people or things that really bring up feelings of stress for them. Often they don't have the best strategies that they've been using. So spend some time brainstorming alternate responses to their stress. Help them to come up with some of their own ideas that make sense, and you might need to throw in a few yourself to help them really have a broad understanding that there are many, many ways to respond to stress. And then support students through the process of selecting which coping skill they might want to use and how to really practice and try to maintain a healthier response to stress. So that's one example of how you can really work with students that might have attendance issues. So now we're going to look at another contributing factor according to the 5th edition, and that is what do underperforming students with discipline issues need. We know that often students show up with discipline issues, and there's lots of other things behind that. So first of all, always be very cautious about discipline data because there is a vulnerability to bias and assumptions. And so be sure that you're always reading discipline data with a critical lens. But even if there is bias in the data, we still need to be sure that we're helping students learn effective strategies so that they're not getting into trouble. And so looking at this list of 9, you can really think through which are the ones that make the most sense for the particular student that you're working with. Sometimes it starts with number 1, making sure the basic skills needs are being met. And sometimes that's not an issue. And so sometimes it has to do with a sense of self-efficacy. So you've got to just really hone in and think about the specific needs of the students. So here's a couple of strategies that can be helpful in this situation. One is creating a book of me. And Karen talked a little bit about the power of writing. This is a book that students co-create with you. You can help them set up chapters like, here's my past, my present, and my future. Give them just space to doodle in there or to write quotes that are meaningful to them or add stories or reminders to themselves. And this is a way to really help students explore their personal history and then see how that kind of connects with their present situation, and then get them focused on the future, which is always an effective way to help students become more engaged in school. Another strategy that you can try is journaling. And we talked a little bit about that earlier, but just remember that journaling is just a time for self-reflection and self-awareness. It's a great strategy for adults as well as students. It's a way to remind yourself that what things did go well. How did you manage a challenge that was difficult for you? And to have that really written down is a way that can absolutely instill hope. These journals can be private to the students. You don't need to be reading them, but of course, if they want to share with you, that's a wonderful thing too, but that should be their choice. It's really about helping them build a skill that will increase their hope and their future focus. Another strategy is called narrative therapy. And so this is something that you may want to do a little more research on yourself, but it's an opportunity for students to tell their story and then you to use your counseling lens to really understand what's underneath this story, and to help them to kind of reshape their perspectives and retell the story of their future. This is just a way to, again, increase hope, increase self-efficacy, that students understand that they can restory their lives. And so this is a really powerful way to help instill that hope and decrease discipline issues, which then again will hopefully increase academic success in school.
So I think the key is that we have to do more than random strategies for students. We have to think about what's the big issues for them and what does the research tell us that students need to know and do. There are many, many ways to help students develop those skills and those knowledge pieces that are ultimately going to lead to life readiness and life success. The thing is that all of those strategies that you know how to do don't always live in the front of your brain. So take a little time to explore and remind yourself, AI can be a good friend to you in this as you explore it. You just have to do that discernment piece where you're really selecting things that are grounded in evidence. So when you're selecting a strategy, think about these questions. Does this strategy have supporting evidence of efficacy? I know in my own journey as a school counselor, I have done things because they sounded good, but I didn't take the time to understand whether or not they really were going to be effective. So take that moment. Is this going to work? Is there evidence, some kind of evidence that this has a chance of working? Think about whether or not it worked for others, but then understand who the others were. Because just because it worked with one group doesn't mean that it's going to work with another. So you've got to think about where did it work, with whom did it work, and will it work for my group of students? And if I need to make adjustments, what are those adjustments going to look like? So consider these 4 questions when you're making the decisions about, is this a thing that my group of students need? So the key takeaways for today, you got to know the research and you got to have some evidence for your strategies, your activities, your interventions. Know that research. Take the time to explore it. It doesn't have to be a trip to the library and an investigation into all of the professional literature. People who write professional articles also write other articles and they talk about their results in other ways. So that internet search can be helpful. Just pay attention to the source, the person, and what's being used to identify that research. This is also going to help you articulate why you're doing the interventions that you're doing. It's not just about delivering to students what they need, it's about helping other people understand what you're doing and why you're doing it. You have to be able to explain your actions to other people. Take that time to discover what students actually need. That's asking about those educational partners and asking the students themselves about insights that all of those folks have on what students need, comparing that to the researching, and then making decisions around which are the priorities for your group of students. And then at the end, you want to assess your strategies and check, did this matter for them to learn this stuff? And as a result of learning it, were they able to change their ultimate outcomes in school and their level of success? The rest of the slides that are provided here offer you other articles to use these are live links. So you can look at, what do you do about work refusal? How do you build self-efficacy? How do you create motivation? My personal pet peeve is that motivation is not built on stickers. Doesn't mean you never use stickers, but you got to be really careful. How do we deal with anxiety and anxious feelings that students are doing? So these are all articles that give you some evidence-based information about how to respond to these things like this. Social media is such a giant part of the lives of our students. Another set of resources that you can look at and consider when we're thinking about students who are being distracted by social media, harmed by social media, or social media is impeding in their success in school. You also have the list for achievement and attendance and discipline. All of those are designed to help you identify ways to respond and make selections around the strategies and interventions that we deliver. They need to be evidence-based. All of this information, we hope, will help you reach that level. There's not a lot of time that we can do to dig deep into all of them, but we hope we've given you enough examples that this will help you make better selections about how you intervene with students when they need support and when you're delivering your tier ones, making sure that you're delivering information that's actually needed by the students. Thank you for listening. We appreciate your presence.